the four teams that were left in the Stanley Cup playoffs were the Tampa Bay Lightning, the New York Rangers, the Colorado Avalanche, and the Edmonton Oilers. And of course, we now know that it's Tampa Bay and Colorado in the Stanley Cup final. But can the Montreal Canadiens learn something from the four teams that made it to the semis? One man thinks they can. What is it they can learn? We'll have that discussion. I'm Marinaro. It's the Sick Podcast. And I'm going to bring in Ryan Sporer from the Hockey Writers. He's coming up right here on the Sick Podcast.
Turn up your volume. Because you're about to listen to the Sick Podcast. With Tony Marinaro. The sickest Montreal Canadiens podcast.
And now a 24th Stanley Cup banner will hang from the rafters of the famous Forum in Montreal. The Canadiens win the Stanley Cup.
Sports entertainment like no other. Brought to you by 8.6 Beer, intense by nature, and La Cage. If the last time you went to La Cage was when the Habs won the Cup, it's time you went back to La Cage. The menu will surprise you.
Marinaro, the Sick Podcast, brought to you by 8.6 Beer. Take a look at this beauty, huh? Look at it, look at it, look at it, look at that, huh? This one here is the strong beer, 7.9% alcohol. We got it in there. Isn't it a beauty, huh? Intense by nature, the beer for those who follow their instinct and live their passions in order to make their mark. And La Cage. If the last time you went to La Cage was when the Habs won the Cup, it's time you get back to La Cage. The menu will surprise you. Oh, man, I could just taste their chicken wings and their all-for-one entree starter. It's absolutely fantastic. I had the poutine last week. And some select locations, by the way, also have pizza. You have to try it. The one with the bacon, sausage, and onions is just cooked just right. I absolutely love it. All right, okay. An article that caught my attention in the Hockey Writers by Ryan Sporer, who's been on the podcast before, was if the Montreal Canadiens could learn something from the four teams that had made it to the semis. And, of course, now we know there are two who have made it to the final. And that is Tampa Bay and Colorado. Ryan joins me now. Ryan, how you doing, bud?
Good. How are you?
Very, very good. Thanks for doing this, man. There you have it. His Twitter handle is up if you're watching us, and you can watch us on YouTube and on Facebook, of course, and on Twitter when we go live, and also on Instagram. Follow us at The Sick Podcast. And by the way, speaking of La Cage, before, I want to let you know that the sickest draft party to ever come to Montreal on Thursday, July 7th. I'm going to be there, and La Cage is going to be a pretty big part of it, of course, because the Montreal Canadiens have the first pick overall in the draft. All right, okay. Ryan, you wrote a piece on what the Canadiens could learn from the four teams that made it to the semis. Let's dive right into it, huh, if we can. And you brought up the name of probably the best player in the National Hockey League, Connor McDavid. Let's bring him up. There you go. The Edmonton Oilers drafted him a number one overall. They had the number one pick overall for several seasons. He's obviously the best of the bunch. What could they learn from Edmonton and the drafting of Connor McDavid?
I think they can learn simply that, tanking. Well, I wouldn't say the Oilers tanked. I think they were just kind of, bottom dwellers for a long time. And, it remains to be seen what happens next season, but especially with their goaltending. But tanking has proven to work. Maybe not all the time, but it works. You need those high draft picks to be able to compete consistently. And the Oilers are kind of the exception to the rule in that they haven't made the playoffs consistently. But if you look at the Stanley Cup winners from the last pretty much the entire cap era, they're the Tampa Bay Lightning, they have the Stamkoses, the Hedmans, you look at the Chicago Blackhawks, Canes, Taves, Pittsburgh Penguins, Crosby, Malkin. All these are
Marc-Andre Fleury.
Marc-Andre Fleury from the stacked 2003 draft class. Yes.
Yeah, the Washington Capitals with Ovechkin at 1 and Backstrom at 4.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, these are all teams that with perhaps the Washington Capitals won 1, the Boston Bruins won 1. Boston Bruins might be an exception, but for all intents and purposes, every single team that won the cup over the last decade and a half, they they spent several seasons at the bottom of the standings, and
Yeah.
it's just kind of, it's not necessarily something the Canadiens can learn specifically from the Oilers. It's just, kind of a lesson to be learned in general that this is part of the natural order of things. It's part of the process.
Yeah, and the Oilers drafted McDavid at 1 and Draisaitl at 3, and the Colorado Avalanche, who were in the Stanley Cup final, drafted McKinnon at 1 and Cale Makar at 4. Let's bring up that picture, actually, of McKinnon and Cale Makar. There you have it. One was drafted at 1, the other one at 4. Man, the one who was drafted at 4 was probably the best player in his draft year. A lot of people are saying, and my buddy Maxime Lapierre from La Poche Bleue is actually saying that he believes that Cale Makar is the best player in the National Hockey League.
I'm sure that there's that always going to be that Bobby Orr, Wayne Gretzky debate, right? So
yeah,
I mean, I personally think it's Gretzky and McDavid in this case, but it's not a bad choice to go with Makar. I mean,
no, and it's not a bad choice to go with our sick merchandise that you can buy at sportbuffshop.com. Use code SICK15 for 15% off on all of their items, and shop all of your sports and licensed apparel, including hoodies, caps, t-shirts of your favorite teams, all major leagues as well. All right, okay. So now, so we could learn something from the Oilers drafting McDavid and having the number 1 pick for several seasons. We can learn something from the Colorado Avalanche drafting Nathan McKinnon at 1 and Cale Makar at 4. We can actually also learn something from the general manager of the defending Stanley Cup champions, who have won it 2 years in a row, who are back in the final, Julien Brisebois, and his work with the CBA?
Yeah, for example, well, I mean, it's more so just him having been able to take advantage of, Nikita Kucherov's injury, whether you believe in it as a conspiracy theory or not. I don't. I think it was legitimate. But yeah, the fact that, I think the Kucherov himself wore a shirt mocking the situation, like $18 million over the cap after they won the cup last season. But yeah, I mean, what's wrong with working the CBA to your advantage? I don't think any team is going to turn down the opportunity to get a Kucherov back for the playoffs. And Habs fans might lament the situation, and understandably so, considering Kucherov is a beast and an MVP caliber player. But by the same token, at the start of this season, when reports of seriousness of Shea Weber's injury came to light, last summer even, everyone was, a lot of people anyway, were thinking that, oh, this is just Kucherov all over again, and the Canadiens are going to be able to reap the rewards come the playoffs. So there's an element of a bit of a hypocrisy there, I think. And then you have the whole acquisition of Brent Seabrook's contract from the Chicago Blackhawks in order to kind of get more cap relief, with Tyler Johnson going the other way. I mean, these are all things that any team would be wise to take advantage of. It's in the CBA. Why not?
And the team that made it to the semis in the Eastern Conference that went up against the Tampa Bay Lightning and eventually lost after taking what you thought would have been a commanding 2-0 series lead and then lost the next 4 to Tampa Bay, are the New York Rangers. And that is a team that was built by Jeff Gordon, who had done some real good work there. They had gone on a rebuild. The signing of Panarin and the acquisition of Adam Fox, and just so many things fell into place for the Rangers. So you brought up Jeff Gordon's name. Talk to me about him and what the Canadiens may have learned throughout all of this when it comes to the Rangers and Jeff Gordon.
I mean, let's call a spade here, in that New York is a great destination for free agents. Montreal, maybe not so much, unfortunately. So the Rangers were able to attract the likes of Fox, via trade, but he made it pretty clear that's where he wanted to play, and Panarin. But what the Canadiens can learn is that the Rangers have got Igor Shesterkin in net for a very cap-friendly deal, I'll say. I mean, true, it was a small sample size, a few seasons in the NHL, after which he signed his current deal. But he's clearly an all-world goalie, and there was a luck involved. But sure, I think it goes to prove that you can't afford to pay a goalie, the $10.5 million per each season that the Canadiens are paying Carey Price. And, whether it's a good thing or not, retirement potentially looming in Price's case, I think the Canadiens are, going to be in a position sooner or later where, they'll press the reset button there and have learned a huge lesson there.
So let's figure it out. Why do players choose New York as a free agent? Why would they prefer it so much more over Montreal? Our bagels are better.
Okay.
All right. Our bagels are better, right? Right. Our bagels are better.
Poutine.
Actually, our traffic, as bad as it is better. And so the only thing it leads me to believe is that Montreal doesn't have a Canal Street where you can buy imitation stuff, which, by the way, it's crappy stuff anyway, man. It sucks. It won't work for more than a week. And you can tell that it's fake, so forget about that. The only thing is bringing Broadway shows to Montreal, I guess.
Well, I mean, we do get musicals, plus Cesar, right?
Yes, but they're not quite.
I guess
they're not the real McCoy.
Clearly, the tax situation works against the Canadiens. I'm sure the language situation, maybe.
Aren't the taxes pretty high in New York too?
I don't think they're as high as here.
Okay, I wouldn't know. Anyway, doesn't matter to me. You got to be making a lot of money to worry about taxes. When you don't make a lot of money, it doesn't really make a difference. All right, okay. So if the Canadiens could learn one thing, it's Jeff Gordon and the rebuild. It's the Oilers drafting Connor McDavid. It's the Colorado Avalanche being able to draft McKinnon and Cale Makar. And it's the work of Julien Brisebois. So with that said, do the Canadiens have certain pieces to the puzzle? Do you think they'll be able to take this information and use it to their advantage? Do you think the future is bright for the Montreal Canadiens knowing all of this? Yes or no, and why?
Well, they do have the first overall draft pick, and anytime you have that in your, let's say, your chip stack, I think, things are looking up for sure.
Pardon me. He doesn't have Connor McDavid or Nathan McKinnon potential. Very unfortunate. I wish he did, but according to those in the know, Shane Wright does not have that potential.
That's true, but I mean that kind of plays into this, my whole argument that, and we've talked about this before. You've brought it up before.
Yes.
Connor Bedard, Matvei Mikov, Adam Fantilli. These are all players who are going to be available at the top of the draft next season. And, an argument why I don't think the Canadiens can afford to make a go of it next season. I think it's the smart play to kind of, let the chips fall where they will and, don't try and hit a home run via free agency. Just kind of, I personally would outright tank and, trade off assets. I've written about that before, and many fans are against the idea. That's fine.
They want to be competitive right away, but they don't see the big picture, which is that if you have one more bad season, you might end up having 7, 8, 9 great seasons.
I think based on the comments I've gotten quite a few hate comments in my day. I'm ashamed to say.
Welcome to my world.
Thanks. I appreciate it. I think it's more so just the fact that, tanking would kind of taint the shine on, such a storied franchise such as the Canadiens. And, the Maple Leafs did it. And I don't think Canadiens fans want to many Canadiens fans don't want to stoop to that level.
They did it for several years, right? Where they got, hold on a second. Well, they got Nylander with a top 10 pick. They got Morgan Riley at 5. They got Mitch Marner at 4, and they got Austin Matthews at 1. But the year that Austin Matthews was the projected number 1 pick, that's the time, I think, where they had just got rid of Dion Phaneuf and Phil Kessel, and they were really trying to get rid of their assets like you just talked about, so they can ice the worst possible team, finish at the bottom, or get that number 1 pick to be able to draft Matthews. In their case, it worked out. It hasn't led to a win yet in the playoffs, but based on the way they played this year versus Tampa, you get the feeling that there's some good days ahead for the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any, Canadiens fan out there who wouldn't take Austin Matthews in the heartbeat. He's a legitimate number one center. He's a legitimate elite player. He's a top 5 player in the league. Some may say the top player in the league, but those are all Maple Leafs fans. I think that the Canadiens can stand to, pardon my French, suck for another season. And it's going to be painful, and, they're going to be growing pains, but I think it's big picture it would be for the best.
You can follow the Sick Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at the Sick Podcast, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's absolutely free and it's worth it. Tell your friends about it because this podcast, like me, is really sick. All right. So if you were a betting man, Ryan Sporer, for the love of the game, you sign up and deposit on Betway for a 100% deposit bonus. The easiest sports book for Canadians because e-transfers are accepted like just almost immediately. If you were a betting man, would you put $1 or $2 that the Montreal Canadiens are going to try and turn this around to be a very competitive team next year, or that they're going to get rid of some assets like you talked about and they'll find themselves in the bottom 4 or 5 teams in the National Hockey League? What would you bet on?
I honestly wouldn't bet on either scenario. I'd bet on them kind of just staying the course, not making the play via free agency, and not offloading assets to be any worse than they would be otherwise. I think they're just gonna play it out and see where things go. I think that if they do it that way, they're going to be a bottom 10 team, and they're gonna theoretically have a chance at that a top 3 pick anyway. Not as high as if they were to unload assets, but I think that's what's happening. And that's contrary to reports that they're going to be aggressive during the free agency period. But I don't see it happening personally.
He writes on the Montreal Canadiens, and you can check him out at the Hockey Writers. Ryan, have a good night.
You too. Thank you.
You're very welcome, and thanks for joining me on the Sick Podcast. I'm Marinaro.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Sick Podcast with Tony Marinaro on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts. The Sick Podcast is brought to you by 8.6, Intense by Nature, and La Cage. If the last time you went to La Cage was when the Habs won the cup, it's time you went back to La Cage. The menu will surprise you.